I was thinking back a couple of weeks ago, I was whining and whinging a little bit about giving a Dhamma talk. And I think not wanting to give one, Tanabasi said, "Oh, that would be a very good subject for a Dhamma talk." So I find myself whining and whinging. And I was thinking about they made a terrible mistake, and I should have asked Tantisaro to give a Dhamma talk this evening. But I was up in my kuti, and it was a bit too late to ask. So I was thinking about what that is that comes up, that not wanting. I'd rather not do this, or I'd rather not bother. I'd rather just hide away in a cave and not do something that I anticipate as unpleasant. And more so the identification with not that giving a talk or talking about Dhamma is unpleasant. Actually, I find it a bit contrary because it can inspire me a bit around my own practice, and it's something that I can learn from. But it's more that, at least for myself, just there's a bit of a overriding anxiety the day leading up to it. What am I going to talk about or say? And I don't really have much to say, or I'd rather not say much. Although I think most of my fellow brothers would not believe that. But yeah, it just, that sense of not wanting, I'd rather not. And it really can come from that just that unpleasantness from what's to come, the sense of feeling of anxiety or fear of what is going to happen or what I'm not going to like, or more an expectation of how something should be. And I was just thinking about that in the larger term, that it's not just the sense of what we don't want, but it's that sense of also not sort of pushing ourselves to learn. At least in my case, it's sort of a sense of, like, how can I look at this as a learning experience? And then it's also around, I think, very much tied into what the Buddha talks about with right effort. And I was just recollecting how often it is that it's easy just not to make an effort or to make a wrong effort. And this is something that I think most human beings can understand, that sense of I'd rather not, I don't want to extend myself or push myself. And this comes in just like all kinds of flavors, all kinds of ways that we really experience our lives and take action in our lives or don't take action. And so it's quite a rich subject. So I think the purification of right effort is that the mind tends to abide more in wholesome states because one has made a habit out of encouraging those wholesome states, out of really like cultivating them and sustaining them. And this could be something like generosity. We most of us see that generosity is a very beneficial state of mind, the generous mind, the sense of feeling of wanting to help others, wanting to be kind to others and look after them in some way, share and give. But often there's a retraction from that. It's like, well, what can I get for myself? I don't want to give this away. I don't want to share. And so there's just so many ways that we can kind of look at our minds when we see this, and we see the opposite, that stinginess, that wanting to keep, wanting to not let others have, or just take what we want for ourselves. And just looking at my own behavior, I mean, one of the things that I see this in very easily is just our main meal of the day comes up, and then it's almost like there's like 3 minutes that we walk through a line of food, that's a beautiful line of food that's been offered in an incredibly beautiful, generous way. And then I just zone out for 3 minutes. It's just like, take what I want. It's not always that way, but often the mind can just go on automatic. And, it's like, oh, I haven't seen that in a while, and oh, I haven't seen that, and I love that. And then all of a sudden, come back with a bowl that's like 10 pounds, and how did this happen? And it's just that habit of not sustaining a wholesome mind state. One, in terms of restraint, the wholesomeness around restraint, around how we encourage ourselves in terms of what we really need, and really also refraining from taking things based on sense indulgence. Our senses, as the priority, our kind of enjoyment of something. And if that's what we're looking at, then also we can end up, eating in unhealthy ways. And I think for most human beings, food is a very, it's quite a big subject for us. It's something that's like comes back to our reptilian brain. And I think for each individual person, there's a different kind of relationship that we have with food. And I would guess that for most people, there's a challenge there. And so with right effort, then we're really trying to see that some sort of that sense of craving, or I have to have this, or I want this, or I'm going to take this for myself, or not think of others, it's something that we need to kind of restrain and prevent, because it's such an inclination that can easily arise. And then once we've learned how to do that, then, we, in a sense, we're letting go of that very craving, that craving for sensuality, that craving for what we want, the opposite of generosity, also thinking of others and what they might like to have, that sense of sharing. And so when that comes in, then, both the restraint of that very strong desire, and then we have more relinquishment, giving up, but then that embracing of being generous, of being kind to others, we think of others. And so this can sometimes be a little late. I saw today, I took 2 of something and I thought, I really would have been much more beneficial to share with others. And also I didn't need these 2 things. One of them was fine. But it's not too late at that point. We can either share with someone, say, hey, do you actually want this? Or we can reflect, we've already taken it, it's already in something that we have. How can I prevent this from happening in the future? How can I really look at my mind and see, catch myself where it's not so easy to do that. And these are just habits. This sense of right effort is really around creating a habit for ourselves about what we're trying to cultivate, what's really the most important thing for us. One of those things that an aspect of right effort is that we're not just bringing up a wholesome state, but we're trying to sustain it. We're trying to continue, have it continue within our minds. So in a way, although we're abandoning unwholesome states, we are actually holding on to the wholesome, and we're trying to make an effort in that way. That's the Buddha would call that making a right effort. I think that sometimes we hear in Buddhist terminology that the best way is to not make an effort, to not actually push ourselves. And I think what that's more talking about is wrong effort, where the Buddha is really cautioning us not to exert ourselves in the wrong way. And so I was talking to Ben actually earlier today, and I was saying we were both bidding each other well for the afternoon, and I said it's a good time to cultivate some meditation, but it's also a good time to take a nap. And Ben laughed and he said, I'm not sure that's necessarily a good cultivation, or something like that. And I said, well, what do you think is better, 15, 20, 30-minute nap or something, and then you feel awake and you meditate for 2.5 hours, let's say? Or is it better to just go right back and sit down and just start meditating for 3 hours and be falling asleep for those 3 hours? And I think Ben had said something like, I can't argue with your numbers. And then I tried to remind him that the Buddha also took naps, although he was enlightened when he did that. So I'm not sure if that's just for enlightened ones. But the reason I bring this up is all joking aside, or kind of a sense of lightness about it, is that we might push ourselves in the wrong way. And something like that, I think that would be a good example of wrong effort, just not seeing that there's another possibility of doing something differently. So it's just like, well, this is the right way, just to just really put in as much effort as I can, and I'll just meditate. And then we can see this as well. Sometimes people will do late night sittings, and a lot of the sitting is just falling asleep. One might say, well, that person is still making an effort, but I'm not sure personally, I don't see that as the right effort. It's much better to learn how we can keep ourselves wakeful and clear when we're trying to meditate. And so that would be a better approach, in my opinion. And in a way, then we're abandoning lethargy, we're abandoning torpor, and we're trying to prevent it from arising. And we're keeping ourselves more in a very wakeful, aware state, and trying to maintain that. So it's important, I think, that one could hear that teaching on effort, or hearing that sometime, that jargon around not making an effort. And I think that that's in a way like how sometimes people push themselves too much. They go towards more of an extreme, and the Buddha, I think, would more call that, rather than non-effort or overexerting oneself, that would be too much. So the sense of when the expression of non-effort, I think, is when one is trying to have more of a sense of what is appropriate. But for me, the jargon doesn't work so well. So I do appreciate the Buddha's paying attention to more of the word right effort. What are the right ways that we exert ourselves? And for each of us, that's going to come up in different ways. We're going to learn often about our particular experience, our particular personalities, how we are as a person, and what we need to encourage ourselves with. So this is much more of a personal thing, much more of a thing that we can look at within ourselves. I was thinking of something that happened recently that was really helpful for me to look at, and I was sitting with a group of monks, and someone said something to me, and I became extremely angry. Or they didn't say something to me, they said something in the group, and I really became quite angry. But it wasn't, what was nice was that there wasn't any potential for me to talk. And so really I had the opportunity to just watch this anger arise and to see it. And it was so palpable for me and visceral within the body that it became quite uncomfortable. And it was very obvious that it was an unwholesome state that I had entered into. But right there would be where I could have seen something about prevention. How do I prevent myself from getting angry? How do I actually see when I do experience aversion that I can have some influence on that, and I can make an effort in the right way to prevent that very unwholesome mind state from occurring. Sometimes this is not possible, so then we move into more of an abandoning mode and asking ourselves if we can abandon this. But when you experience anger, when anger is experienced, it can take over the whole mind. And in that particular situation, I saw that it did. And so one of the things we can do, I think, with that is like actually using this Buddha's sense of right effort, like just ask ourselves a bit of a funny question, like, okay, I'm pretty angry right now. Like, how long do I want to keep this going? Like, do I want to go for an hour, 2 hours? Is that kind of reasonable? Do I want to feel my self-justification and really stew in this for maybe 3 hours would be more appropriate? So just asking myself that question, I can see that the answer would be like, just shut up and let me be angry. I just want to be angry. But really, we can see the absurdity of it. That to try to sustain our own anger, it's not something that's comfortable. It's something that we might feel again justified in the experience we're having. Our thoughts might be that we are justified for feeling this way, this sort of self-righteousness. But at least in our own awareness, we can sense the extreme discomfort of it, the suffering that's occurring when something that's visceral as aversion is coming up. And so in that situation, we really can see that this is the time to really practice as the Buddha's teaching on right effort. If we haven't been able to prevent something unwholesome from arising, we can work at its abandoning, letting it go. We can actually speak to ourselves in a way that's encouraging ourselves, like this is not, helpful. It would be much better to let this go. But one of the things that we can encourage ourselves in the future is then how to really prevent that, because we don't want to actually allow it to happen. There isn't anywhere in the Buddha's teachings that I've found where the Buddha encourages anger in a particular way, where he says, well, there's actually some appropriate times for when you should get angry. So that's not within his teachings. In fact, he goes as far as to have a more extreme teaching. And it's sometimes hard to read this sutta, but I think it's in the simile of the saw. He's talking about, well, if your enemies are sawing your limbs apart, even to have a mind moment of aversion is not to practice his teachings. And when I read that, it's very hard to take in, because I know, wow, that's a pretty high expectation. And I think for me, where I see it, it's like, yes, the Arahant would not experience a mind moment of aversion. towards those individuals. But I think when the Buddha says that his teaching is not being practiced with that, it's much more of a sense of there's no justification for it. We can't really come up for a justification even in something that's that extreme. And so he says, even when there might be an opening that would seem plausible, it would seem justified, still, there wouldn't be a way for us to take in his teachings and to say that, yeah, this is the appropriate way to respond. So the way that we're really trying to work with this, I think, is being able to be more and more aware of what is actually occurring in our own minds, and then to move forward with either that sense of preventing these unwholesome states or abandoning them if they've already come into the mind. But then if you think about something like anger, the opposite of that would be metta, right? It would be wishing others well, wishing ourselves well. And so that's really the cultivation that the Buddha is talking about. So it's not all this negation. It's as much that we're bringing in the positive qualities that we should experience, that we want to experience, we want to bring into our minds, that will ultimately allow us to be liberated. But we don't just cultivate these wholesome states. It's just as much as we're trying to prevent unwholesome states and we're trying to abandon them, we're also trying to sustain wholesome states. And that's also a skill that one can learn. So something like that could be, as I was speaking about with generosity, is just encouraging ourselves to be generous, but then looking at the feeling of that. What's the result of sharing? How does it feel to give to others? And in noticing that very quality that's very buoying and it just feels good to be generous, then we can see how that we can have and encourage ourselves to sustain that very quality, to keep it in mind. And all of these efforts, they really work in tandem with each other. So preventing stinginess and sustaining generosity. So there really are four efforts that we're continuing to bring into the mind and circle around and keep as part of our practice. One of the things that comes up a lot with this is in our own meditation. And there seems to be, for me, just a lot of effort that is often necessary in order to really create the right conditions for the meditation to be helpful. So it's often in working with the hindrances that we find that we're continuing to need to make these right efforts. We're continuing to try to bring them up and sustain them in our mind. And in the last, we were just sitting for 45 minutes. You can think back to that, what were some of the hindrances that were coming up? It's great if there was just peace and calm and the thinking process did not take over or take us from one destination to another. But when we really bring in these right efforts, we can see that if we prioritize them in the meditation, we really try to bring them up as much as possible. They really help us deal with these hindrances so they don't take over our minds. It's sort of like the advent of the internet or something like YouTube or cell phones. There is a way that we can become very addicted to these devices or the experience of being on the internet, this is what people are trying to do in terms of engineering them. There was some kind of I guess it would be a programming with YouTube where I read about the fact where after a video is played, then the next video is already loaded, right? There's some sort of thing saying that there's a countdown timer, and if you don't stop it, then you're going to go to the next video. And that is, I think, endemic around how the internet kind of works in general. I also read that the person who created that program might think, they have I would think that would be a lot of bad karma. But what I read was they actually regretted that they created that. And that was something that that person was quite regretful about and unhappy. And we can see that the reason for this is just like in our own meditation, this is kind of how the mind can work. It's just like as awareness is trying to make its way and trying to use awareness in a very skillful way within the mind during meditation, It's just the next thought it's just on the next countdown. It's going to start again. And so we're really trying to prevent that from occurring, but it's so natural and so easy that our minds just go to the next thought, just the next part of our jumping to the next experience, and that's interesting morsel that we can have. And so it's very helpful to actually stop that and say, okay, I'm not going to actually go to the next video. I'm not going to go to the next thought. And it's very hard to do because it's addicting for us, our own thought process. It works in the same way. This is an addicting approach. And so we really have the opportunity over and over to see that and say, okay, I'm not going to follow that kind of circling arrow that's going to say the next thought's coming. The next thought is coming, I'll just follow it. But that is a habit. It can't just happen. It's not something that is easy for us. And I think most people who meditate find this to be one of the more challenging aspects. The mind, it creates thoughts, it creates sankharas, it's creating this whole process for us. That's what it does. And it's because of our habits, it's because we tend to run through our lives just following thoughts. So the Buddha gave us this gift of right effort so we can abandon that. And then we can see, there are really wholesome aspects to cultivate. When a person moves from, who hasn't meditated at all, moves from a point of just catching their breath for a few seconds, they watch, and the breath comes in, the breath goes out, breath comes in, breath comes out. And it's not just that the awareness of that is present, it's that there's the understanding this is actually occurring. The mind is no longer absorbed in thought. There's an interest in the body, there's an interest in the experience of the body. And just the first time that that's noticed, it's an incredible experience. Because that's really when awareness is noticed. Okay, this is what awareness is. This is what the experience of just seeing clearly the mind, the experience that we have in front of us, rather than just being swept up. One of the problems, though, is that we lose that interest, we lose that excitement around enjoying our experience of being present. And because it takes effort, because it takes time to develop that habit, it's not easy for us. And so again, we want to take the easy route, the easiest thing to do, not really make an effort. Just enjoy the sense pleasures, enjoy the food, the thoughts, whatever it is. And so really we have the opportunity to change our lives in such a significant way just by paying attention to these four right efforts. And the more we do and the more we're able to cultivate a sense of awareness as being the priority in our own experience, then we have the reward of the hindrances that I mentioned, the hindrances of mind, desire, aversion. We can have a lot of delusion within our own experience, or worry and fear, anxiety, or just being kind of lazy, or being in a habit of just kind of tuning out, falling asleep to the world. So much of that is something that can disappear for us. And what takes over are very wholesome qualities in the mind. Something like relinquishment, or seeing that rather than just going after our own desires, we actually feel, I don't need that. I don't actually want that thing because it's going to complicate my life. It's going to increase my desire. And I don't find that very pleasant. And so it has a really wholesome and magical and helpful result when we move into this area of the wholesome, when we start to really abandon those things that are harmful for us. And we see that the cultivation of the wholesome, the cultivation of qualities like kindness and generosity, joy, and just a sense of non-complication, it brings so much happiness. And so that effort-making, that changing of habits that can occur for us, it really is something that we can see clearly as not only beneficial, but something that we want to move towards. We begin to have confidence in. And that's the faith that the Buddha talks about. Faith that it works and it is beneficial, it is helpful for us. So these are some words of encouragement tonight, and anything that's been helpful or beneficial, then please take it with you and reflect on it. And anything that has not been helpful, just feel free to leave it behind.